Hello, everybody. I welcome you to the lecture on Introduction to Psychology. The subject psychology provides better understanding into why people behave as they do so. Probably many times we wonder why we do the things in certain way. An example could be when you're upset. We speak things which we would not have wanted to. And then many times we spend time thinking, why did I say that? And sometimes there are instances that some of your acquaintances have a very relaxed attitude to different situation, which might make you perplexed. So, psychology helps us to better understand our own thoughts, feelings, behavior, and attitudes, and hopefully it can strengthen the way we tolerate the wide differences that exist among people around us. Now, this field seeks to understand each person as an individual, and it also examines how we behave in a group setting and how we might react to each other, and then how we might treat them. Now, this is the format of my presentation. I'll be talking about definition, the schools of psychology, the methods of psychology, and the different branches of psychology. So you might have question in the exam, define psychology, explain the schools or methods, or maybe the scope of psychology. So let's go one by one. Now first, let's go to the definition part. Now the word psychology was derived from the Greek word psyche and logos. Psyche meaning soul and logos meaning discourse or study. Now, the first use of the term psychology is often attributed to the German scholastic philosopher Rudolf Gochel, and this word became quite popular because of the German rationalist Christian Wolff. Earlier, psychology was regarded as the study of soul. For some time, it was called the mental philosophy. Now, about 400 years ago, philosophers began to translate psychology as a study of mind, and thus psychology came to be defined as a study of mind. However, a more acceptable definition of psychology today is that it is a scientific study of the behavior and mental process of human and other animals. Now, this definition can be broken down into three parts. The first is it is a scientific study. The second is it studies both behavior and mental processes. And the third part, it not only studies animals plus human. Now, the first part of our definition states that it is a scientific study. Indeed, the theories and the facts of psychology emerge from the careful application of scientific method. Now, I have a question for you. What is your opinion about this? People who are all very intelligent, how do you think their general life satisfaction is? Their social competence, physical health, and mental health. Do you think people who are very intelligent are better compared to the average people in these areas? What is your opinion? Can anybody?
You can type in your responses in the chat box if you want.
Yes. Okay, good. So now I'll just open up. Generally, people believe that people who are very intelligent, they're very socially, emotionally maladjusted. You generally hear people commenting, "Oh, he's too smart." No, sometimes he'll have breakdown or something like that. But then, and then people also say when it is Amavasya or Purnima, psychiatric problems appear. So these are beliefs people generally have, which is not very scientific. Now, to disprove this, there was a classic research, a long-term study of 1,528 individuals who were very gifted. It means their IQ was above 140. This was done by Lewis Terman in the 1920. After his death, the study was continued by Robert Sears and Pauline Sears. And their study said that people whose IQ is above 140, they tend to be happier, socially adept, physically healthy, and emotionally strong. So, as I said, so this is a scientific study, and the use of psychological research using scientific methods provided enlightening and reliable information about behavior and mental process. Otherwise, we might not learn. Now, let's go to the second part of the definition that it says it is a study of behavior and mental process. Now, to illustrate this, now let me give an example. Let's imagine that you were in a traffic signal waiting for the signal to turn green, and then from the opposite side a car is coming towards you, veering towards you. It is out of control. Now you would react instantly in different ways. You will become alert, you will have an emergency response, your heart rate is going crazy, you jump out of the vehicle and try to escape from the danger. The people who were around you would have observed your reactions, the fear you have expressed, or some words you might have used, but the observers would not have known what would have happened to your heart rate or your thoughts. So, when psychologists focus their research on very limited aspects of behavior, they're operating on what is known as a micro level of analysis. So, a neuropsychologist might record how changes in your brain wave patterns are related, say, when you are experiencing that intense anxiety. Another level is the molecular level, when they study somewhat larger units of behavior, such as how noise affects intellectual functioning or how an infant could respond to a novel stimuli. Finally, a molar approach. So, psychologists could examine behavior at a broader level of analysis, the molar level, as a study large units of behavior of the whole person in a complex situation. So, they might investigate the array of complex psychological, cultural, and situational factors that contribute to people's physiological and psychological responses to stressful events. So that was the second part of the definition. Let's go to the last part. I said it's a study of human and other animals. Now there are at least five major reasons why psychology includes the study of animal behavior as well as human behavior. The first one is because we need a simpler model. Now, scientists generally in all fields they attempt to understand a particular phenomena by first studying the simplest example available in nature. For example, respiration or metabolism and other cellular process, a biologist must first examine them in a simple single-celled amoeba as opposed to a complex multi-celled organism. So similarly, scientists seeking to understand the neurological process that underlie behavior can benefit, say, examining a simple animal. The second reason is control. So, to study animal behavior is greater control that it provides. So, in a typical experiment, a number of different factors or variables may influence the outcome. So, the more control the experimenter has over these variables, the more precise the conclusion can be. And so, by using animal subjects, you could carefully monitor important conditions such as levels of hunger, rest, or stress. So, the next reason is ethical issue. So, see, few years back, before the MRI or CT scan, people would use electrodes to sunk into the brain and see what area of the brain was functioning. Now, you wouldn't be happy if a scientist knocks your door and says, "Hey, I want to check your frontal lobes. Can I check your brain?" I'm not sure you'll be very cooperative about this. So, first, probably we will do experiment on animals and then generalize to the human beings. So that will be the ethical issue. The next reason is a practical one. Now, animals are readily available for experimentation, often at minimal cost. And the next reason is nature versus nurture issues. Now, a relative contribution of heredity versus environment to a given behavioral pattern. Now, this question commonly known as nature versus nurture. Now, trying to explain traits and behavior. For example, our social competence, quick tempers, or musical abilities, is it because of our environment or is it because of the heredity aspects. Now, so to study a human lifespan, it is difficult because we have a longer lifespan compared to the other animals. So several generations of rats, for example, can be studied in a few years. And so till now, we have defined psychology as a scientific study of behavior and mental process, and it's a study of human as well as animal. Now we go into the next part of the presentation, schools of psychology. So in the history of psychology, so this can be divided into two broad periods. The first is a pre-scientific period, extending from the works of Greek philosophers through the later half of the 19th century, from 1879, where the first psychology lab was created. So, earlier philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, and Locke, they speculated about the mind. Where is it located? How do ideas within the mind gain expression in physical actions? Does the mind influence the body? If so, how does this happen? So they had formulated certain assumptions, though they used logic, but it did not have scientific basis. So from 1879, when the first psychology lab was created, from there we have the scientific period, scientific era. This involved schools or systems of psychology. Now I'll be going through one by one. The first school is the structuralism school. This was done by Wilhelm Wundt, and as I said, psychology had a philosophy and religious background. So Wundt wanted it to be more objective, and he tried to compare it to the subject of science like physics and chemistry. So he was concerned with discovering the structure or anatomy of the conscious process, and he attempted to develop a kind of mental chemistry by breaking experiences down into basic elements like how you divide the molecules of water into hydrogen and oxygen. So he wanted to be much more scientific. Now he used a method called as introspection in trying to get the basic ideas of conscious process. Now, if I ask you, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? In your mind, you're getting the image of your favorite flavor, the taste, the smell, or the chill sensation. Now, with this example, introspection means looking within and describing our conscious experience, which consists of basically three elements: sensation, images, and feelings. So, with the example of the ice cream, you could get the images of your favorite flavor, you were feeling happy, joy, thinking about it, and the chill sensation. So, these all covers introspection. Now, people started to become uncomfortable with this ideas of structuralism school, and they felt like I should make a new school. So, the next school is called as functionalism. This school was developed by William James. He was pretty much influenced by the evolutionary theory of Charles Darwin. And the focus of this school was about consciousness and behavior. Now, this school was interested in trying to understand the mental processes that help human and other animals, how they adapt to their environments. They did many experiments in the ways which how we learn, how do we memorize, how do we problem solve, and motivation different aspects. And they try to explain how animals or human beings adapt to their environment. So that was about functionalism. The next school is psychoanalysis. Now, this name, Sigmund Freud, is going to be there for a long time in your life. He'll be coming on and off. So, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology, he had the honor of working with Joseph Breuer. He was a neurophysician. His patient had something like a neurotic spectrum, a lot of pain, vague symptoms here and there. He was pretty much fascinated with this patient, and he had the opportunity to work with many patients who had traumatic childhood experiences, somewhat sexual abuses, or something which they had tried to keep it in their mind. So, working with these patients, he came to the conclusion that the behavior and mind what we do, what we think, are all because of the biological drives inside. And these needs are trying to come out. And he also said that these biological drives, or the sexual needs, or these feelings are unconscious. You're not aware of it, but they're trying to make you behave in certain ways. In this time of the early 1900s, it was a taboo to talk about sexuality. So Sigmund Freud was criticized hugely, and his points were not taken, but he was the father of psychology, obviously. But then he had an impact in terms of uh, he was trying to get the processes not immediately available to conscious inspection, detailed evaluation of patients. He also helped to legitimize the study of human sexuality. More about him in the personality theories of psychopathology. The next school I'll be talking about is behaviorism. This school was pretty disappointed with Freudian's model of unconscious zone and sexuality, things which is not seen, which is not very objective, which was very vague. And he said, we need to be more objective in terms of studying psychology. So you cannot describe mind just how you uh, describe heart or lungs. Nobody can see it. But then he said, we can all observe behavior, which was much more direct. The behavior could be verified by others. There is no bias, no distortion. So Watson came up with assumptions about behaviorism. He said learning was the most important factor in understanding of behavior. And how does this learning process happen? This is from the association, from the external stimulus, and the behavior response. As a child, you don't understand the red signal or the green signal in a traffic light. As you grow up, you will learn it that red signal I have to stop, green signal you have to move. Now there is an external stimulus and there is a behavior of you reacting to that. Now that is called as learning. So he said inferences about what was going inside an organism should be rejected, and since the only thing which can be observed directly was the organism behavior, and he said all the behavior, whether animal or human, it was learned the same way. So this is about behaviorism. The next school is Gestalt. Gestalt psychology originated in the work of Max Wehrdemer. So these people said that they are interested in looking at the totality of the mind and behavior. And their principle was the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. So, Gestalt, according to them, is a German word meaning shape or form. So, when we look at the word, we usually perceive the complex scenes composed of many groups of objects, and objects will have a smaller part. So, Gestalt psychology tries to answer how we accomplish a remarkable perceptual achievement of how we organize perceptual input into groups. More about Gestalt psychology coming in the chapter of perception. The next school is humanistic psychology. This is Carl Rogers. So these were the people who believed that humans are unique beings, and this school of psychology grew pretty much as an opposition from the earlier schools of psychology and behavior. The other schools were pretty overly concerned with too much of analysis or objectivity and quantifying, and they are forgetting the important part, the feeling part of a human being. And they emphasize the role of free choice and our ability to make conscious, rational choices about how we lead our lives. They also believe that every human being has a natural inclination to strive to fulfill the potential, a process he called as self actualization. So, these were the schools of psychology. So, we have covered till now the schools of psychology, structuralism, functionalism, psychoanalytic school, behaviorism, Gestalt school, and humanistic psychology. The next, we are going for methods of psychology. So, the main goals of psychology are to describe, explain, predict, and control or change the behavior. So there are a lot of variety of methods in acquiring knowledge about human behavior. The first one is experimental methodology. So in this experimental approach, they use a method of principles of science. There is empirical approach to the study of mind. The experimental approach here, tests are conducted on the participants where maximum control are made. And these tests are conducted either on group of individuals or participant. They're exposed to a stimuli and how they respond to the stimulus is recorded and analyzed. Now I'll give you an example. Let's take there are three groups of students aged between 18 to 20 and we want to check how sleep has an impact on memory. So we take the first group. Let's consider that each group has 5 students. So the first group, they're allowed to sleep by 9 p.m. The second group of students are allowed to sleep by 11 p.m. And the third group is allowed to sleep by 1 a.m. They're all made to wake up by 6 a.m. and made to read a list of words. Depending on how much they can recall, we will conclude our result. Say if the third group could not recall many words, we will say sleep did not have an impact on memory. If all the group performed almost similar, we would conclude sleep had no impact on memory. So we had formulated few ideas, hypotheses, which were observable events, and we tried to make changes which we hypothesized, and we kept other conditions controlled and looked for an effect of change or variation on the system under observation. Now, we have in the experimental method called variables. So variable is an event or condition which can have different values. So ideally it is an event or condition which can be measured and which varies quantitatively. Now we have something called as independent variable and dependent variable. Independent variable is what the experimenter has in control. For example, the sleep or the list of words told to read in the experiment setting. So that is independent variable. And how you responded, how many words you could recall, that was the dependent variable. Now, there are a few positives of our experimental method that you can replicate it and we can get accurate results. But the limitation is that you can't cover the entire of human behavior in a lab setting. So that is the limitations of a experimental methodology. And the next method is surveys. So the survey is in which a representative group of people are questioned about their behaviors or attitudes. For example, you want to check how the students in Rajarajeshwari or KIMS feel about sharing domestic chores at this COVID time. So you cannot probably ask all the students in Bangalore. So you'll select few college students and inquire them, and then you tend to generalize. So they are the representative sample group, and you carefully construct questionnaire, and then you will reveal that this is a trend that's happening in the general population, even though only a small percentage of that population is surveyed. Now, once a sample is selected, survey data may be obtained either orally through face-to-face interview or in a written form using a paper pencil questionnaire. So surveys can provide a broad profile of attitudes and behaviors of a large group, but it cannot closely give specific individuals to understand their behaviors or attitudes. So you see this information in the newspaper channels and all. So this many percentage of people feel this way, people may not agree with this. So these are basically surveys. So the next method is observation. Now, if as a clinician you want to see how the client normally behaves in a given setting, you will have to use a method of observation. So clinician can observe how the individuals act in a natural setting, and they can be in a place where the behavior ordinarily occurs. So the observations can be of two types, overt or covert. Overt observations are where the subjects are not aware. The covert, the subjects are aware that you're observing them. So in observation method, after making a number of observations, so the clinician can usually, using certain rules of logic, try to infer the causes of behavior being studied. So one aspect of the method of systemic observation is simply to describe behavior as it occurring naturally, like what do people do, how do people differ in their behavior. And with this technique, we can also seek what causes the observed behavior. Now, there are a few limitations in observation, that it could be very subjective or there could be observer's bias. And that's it about observation. So the next method is case study, which we all do. So it is an in-depth exploration of either a single case or a small group of individuals who are examined individually. People become subjects for case studies because they have some physical or emotional disorders, or because they have manifested a specific atypical behavior. So the next method is clinical and psychometric methods. I remember a case in the OPD where a gentleman who was in his mid 20s, he reported to our OPD with a far relative. So the relative, he stayed in city and the patient was from a village, and the relative could not provide any details about the patient. All he heard from the patient's family, who had requested him to consult their son, who was from quite a long time not going for work, not interacting with people around, and they wanted him to get the best medicine and make him completely normal. So with this poor case history details, we had to perform psychological tests, and we had few potential diagnoses, either depression, psychosis, or mental retardation. So based on this information, we perform certain psychological tests, say Bender-Gestalt test, Rorschach plot, thematic perception, and intelligence tests, which I'll be teaching you later in the next classes. So we could get to a diagnosis, and with that information, we could understand the nature of the problem faced by this client, and we were able to suggest appropriate course of action for dealing with the problem. So basically, these are the methods of psychology: experimental, survey, observation, case study, clinical and psychometric method. So we have covered till now the schools of psychology and the methods of psychology. We are going to the last part, the branches of psychology. So that's why we have defined psychology in abstract terms, also by seeing what sort of things people, psychologists do. Now, uh, there's much growth in this field, and more specialization in terms of both training and research has occurred. So they work in a variety of settings, including universities, colleges, industry, military services, prisons, and hospitals. Let's go to the different branches in psychology. The first one is experimental psychology. So this is the oldest of the specialized areas within psychology, beginning in about 1879 from the laboratory studies of consciousness and of sensory process such as vision and hearing. This area expanded rapidly to include research on perception, attention, emotion, thinking, and learning. So the experimental psychologist studies how behavior is modified and how people retain these modifications, the processing of information in thinking, and how human sensory systems work to allow people to experience what is going on around them and the factors that urge them on giving direction to behavior. The next field I'm going to talk about is clinical and counseling psychology. So, in this field, the counseling psychologists tend to focus on less serious problems of adjustment, and they work usually in a high school setup, college, or university setting, and they might assist students with problems of social, academic, or adjustment issues. A clinical psychologist will work in a mental health setup, and they emphasize on psychosocial causes such as inappropriate learning, faulty attitudes, and disturbed interpersonal relationship, and they focus on psychotherapy as a best road to improvement. So the next is community psychology. So this is a study of social problems and the process of adjustment to a particular lifestyle. It also involves the interrelationship between a person and his environment. So, community psychologists apply psychological principles, ideas, and points of view to help solve social problems and to help individuals adapt to their work and living groups. They also set up programs to reach people in the community who happen to have behavioral problems. And they often work to encourage certain groups to participate in community decisions, to provide psychological information, for example, about effective and health promoting behaviors or child rearing practices, and so on. The next field is school and educational psychology. In India, we probably may not have much of differentiation. You probably call it as a school psychologist. So, the job of school psychologists consists of counseling disturbed children and their parents, diagnosing learning difficulties, and trying to remedy them and to assist them with standardized testing and educational programs. So, educational psychologist involves in the study of psychological problems relating to education as encountered by both the student and the teacher. So, thus, the educational psychologist is concerned with the measurement of achievement, the creation of methods for improving teaching, and the difficulties in dealing with exceptional child, and so on. Next one is developmental psychology. So, this involves the study of factors that shape behavior from the prenatal period to old age. So, the developmental psychologist would be interested to learn how one acquires language, say about emotional development, how is the cognitive development during childhood and throughout life, what are the different social and cultural influences on child's development. They're also concerned how these processes occur under normal circumstances. They're also interested in learning about things that can disrupt developmental process by understanding how and why people change. And developmental psychologists can help people live up to their potentials. So the next one is social psychology. So we all as human beings spend much of our time in the presence of other people, so with whom we interact in a variety of ways in different settings. So the primary focus of social psychologists is on understanding how individuals are affected by other people. Now this focus covers a wide range of possible interests. It could be the ways in which people perceive others and how this perception affect our behavior towards them. And it also involves concerted efforts to understand the determinants of interpersonal influences and of attitude change. Next is environmental psychology. This is a recent update into this field, and the study of environment has gathered considerable momentum with the increasing number of environmental issues confronting the world's population. A number of environmental psychologists have turned their major research efforts towards assessing the effect of behavior on such things, for example, noise pollution or overcrowding. The next field is industrial psychology. So, the field of industrial and organizational psychology uses psychological concepts to make the work plays a more satisfying environment and for both employees and management. So, psychologists may work with business either as company employees or as consultants, and they design programs to improve morals, increase job satisfaction, foster better communication within the corporation, enhance productivity, and increase workers' involvement in decision making. The next is forensic psychology. So, this is another specialty that works hand in hand with the legal code and correctional system. They assist police in a variety of ways, from developing personality profiles of criminal offenders to helping law enforcement personnel to understand problems like family conflict and substance abuse and so on. So they may also assist judges and parole officers in making decisions about disposition of convicted offenders. So the next field is health psychology. So in recent years, there has been a mounting interest in achieving and maintaining good health, both physical and psychological. So, for many years, we are aware that emotional conditions such as stress or depression play an important role in the development of physical ailments. So, increasing evidence also indicates that psychological factors have a great deal to do with this prevention and on recovery from illnesses. So, health psychologists are currently active in such diverse areas as assessing the psychological and physical effects of stress, developing programs to help people reduce stress in their lives, studying coping strategies for dealing with serious illness, devising ways to test people for susceptibility to diseases, and seeking to identify the factors that motivate people to engage in health threatening activities, for example, smoking, overeating, or undereating. The next field is cognitive psychology. Now, this field has become very popular. So, this field is concerned with how we construct the information from the environment, how new information is acquired, and how we judge about things and how we make choices. So, this field helps us to understand how human beings think and process information, how the brain works. So it helps us how to improve our cognitive functions, say memory, attention, and how to make problem solving better or to make decisions easier, and also how we treat cognitive disorders. Next is cultural psychology. So when we think of culture, we mostly visualize the way people dress, their buildings, their different kinds of food, the body language, the religious practices or wedding rituals. So, cultural psychologists are interested in the ways that cultural forces influence psychological processes, that is, the way we think, our emotions, the way we deal with our relationships, and our social processes. So, understanding the cultural aspect is the first step towards appreciating how it helps people. So many contemporary psychologists who investigate the effects of culture do so by comparing national cultures to determine universal and cultural specific patterns of behavior. The last of it is positive psychology. So, positive psychology is one of the newest branches of psychology to emerge. Now, this area focuses on how to help human beings lead a healthy, happy life. So, this is a scientific study of optimal human function that aims to discover and promote the factors that allow individuals and communities to thrive. This field assesses such as well-being, social responsibilities, nurturance, altruism, civility, tolerance, work ethics, and other factors that contribute to the development of citizenship and communities. So, these are the different branches of psychology we have gone through, and we have basically covered the definition, schools of psychology, methods of psychology, and branches of psychology. So, I end my presentation. So, you're welcome to ask questions.